Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. The desert evening settled into a quiet stillness as Elias Ward guided his horse along the worn trail that cut across the empty plains. He wasn't traveling for pleasure. He rarely did. The trip was a supply run, food, tools, and a short break from the isolation of the small grazing camp he maintained miles west. He preferred to work alone, far from the towns where too many eyes recognized him, and far from the ranch where a single mistake years earlier had cost him friendships, reputation, and any wish to live among people again. He had planned to reach the camp before dark, but a dust storm rising in the distance changed that. The rolling haze of sand and wind pushed him to look for shelter, and the old line shack near the ridge was the only safe structure between him and the storm front. Elias dismounted, tied his horse under the overhang, and pushed the wooden door open with caution. The hinges groaned. The interior smelled of dust, old firewood, and long months without visitors. He stepped inside, intending only to wait out the storm. Then he stopped. Someone was already there. A young Apache woman sat against the back wall, half slumped, her shoulders tense and her breathing shallow. Her long dark hair was tangled, her clothing torn in several places. Dried blood marked one side of her shirt near the ribs. She tried to shift upright when she noticed him, but pain forced her to inhale sharply and steady herself with one hand. Elias lifted his hand slightly, not threatening, just showing he wasn't reaching for a weapon. "I didn't know anyone was here," he said quietly. His voice stayed low and steady, the way he used to speak to startled livestock. The woman watched him with alert, defensive eyes. Her hand hovered near a small knife at her side, though she was clearly too weak to use it well. Her name, he would later learn, was Ahina. Right now, she was a stranger looking at him with a mix of fear, caution, and pride, the kind of pride people hold on to when everything else is slipping away. Elias took a slow breath. "You can leave," he told himself. "You don't owe anyone trouble." Not again. But the wound on her side was serious, maybe fresh. She wouldn't survive outside if the storm hit hard. He stepped once to the side, not closer. "You hurt bad?" he asked. Ahina's eyes flicked to the torn fabric at her ribs. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to show weakness in front of him. Then she saw it, his brief glance at the exposed, vulnerable state she was in. Her face tightened. She pushed herself straighter against the wall, visibly fighting the pain. And with a trembling voice, she said something he hadn't expected. "According to tribal law, you must marry me now because you saw me like this." Elias froze, not because the words frightened him, but because they carried a tone that was not dramatic or manipulative, just strained, exhausted, and rooted in something she believed she was required to say. He knew enough about Apache customs to understand the seriousness behind it. This wasn't a joke or a trick. Ahina held her breath, watching his reaction, as if bracing for what he might demand of her now that she had spoken the words. Elias felt a knot form in his chest. "She thinks I'll take advantage. She thinks every man would." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't come here to harm you," he said. His voice was calm, but his mind was working fast. "If I walk away, she dies. If I stay, she thinks I want something. If I say the wrong thing, she panics." He hated that this decision now carried weight for both of them. The wind outside thickened, rattling the boards of the shack. The storm was almost on them. Ahina tried to rise on one elbow, grimacing. "You cannot stay here unless the law binds us," she insisted, though her voice wavered from pain and exhaustion more than conviction. Elias crouched down several feet away, close enough to speak clearly, but far enough to keep his distance respectful. "You're hurt," he said. "Let me fix that first. Whatever you think happens next, it won't." She blinked, confused, uncertain whether to trust the quiet cowboy who did not fit the story she'd been told about men living alone on the frontier. He took out a small rolled cloth from his saddlebag. Inside were simple tools: needles, thread, strips of clean cloth, and an old tin of salve. Her eyes stayed locked on his hands, every movement watched closely. As he approached, she tensed, one hand clutching her torn shirt. "I'll only touch the wound," he said firmly. "Nothing else." She hesitated long enough to show her internal struggle. Fear of vulnerability, fear of trusting a man she had never met, fear of what tribal law demanded of her. But pain won the argument, and she exhaled once, a short permission. Elias worked carefully. He cleaned the wound with steady, practiced motions. The injury looked like a blade cut, shallow but long, and it needed bandaging. Ahina pressed her lips together to keep from crying out. A tremor passed through her shoulders, revealing how close she was to her limit. He noticed the tremble. "You did well," he said quietly. "It'll hold." She didn't answer. Her breathing steadied, and her eyes slowly lost the sharpness of immediate panic. But the tension didn't disappear completely. "Why help me?" she finally asked. Her tone wasn't angry, just tired and confused. Elias wiped his hands with a clean cloth. "I've done enough wrong in my life," he said. "Helping someone isn't the part that ever got me in trouble." There was truth behind the words, a heaviness he didn't bother hiding. Ahina studied his expression, tried to read the meaning beneath it. Outside, the storm wind rose, sweeping sand against the walls. The lined shack shook lightly, reminding them both that neither one could leave tonight. Ahina leaned her head back against the wall, tired. Her earlier declaration still hung in the room, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Elias sat near the fire pit, pulling dry wood from a corner. "We'll talk about your law later," he said, not dismissing it but not accepting it blindly either. "For now, you stay warm and breathe easy." Ahina watched him through half-closed eyes. She didn't trust him fully. Not yet, but something in his quiet manner made it harder to fear him. The storm rolled in hard. The night began, and two strangers, bound by injury, circumstance, and a tense misunderstanding of tribal law, found themselves forced to share the same small shelter while confronting the shadows of their pasts. The storm hit the lined shack with full force, shaking the loose boards and sending thin trails of dust drifting down from the rafters. Elias added a few pieces of dry wood to the small fire he had managed to start. The flames rose slowly, spreading a steady warmth across the cramped room. Ahina sat near the back wall, wrapped in the blanket he had placed beside her. She kept her posture guarded, but the tension in her shoulders had eased enough for her breathing to settle. Elias didn't push her to talk. He understood that silence was safer than the wrong question, and he sensed she wasn't ready to reveal anything beyond what necessity forced out of her. Still, certain things needed to be addressed tonight, things she had hinted at but not explained. He checked the bandage he'd tied around her ribs earlier. It held well, and the bleeding had stopped. She watched his hands carefully again, tracking every movement. "I need to ask you something," Elias said, keeping his voice low. "You said you're being hunted. I need to know what kind of trouble is coming this way." Ahina lowered her gaze for a moment. She looked like she was choosing her words with care, deciding how much to trust him. "3 men," she said finally. "White men. They attacked my family's camp. They took horses, food, whatever they could carry. When we ran, they chased us. My mother and brother fell behind. I don't know if they lived." Her voice tightened slightly, but she didn't let it break. "I crossed them again 2 days ago. They knew I recognized them. They wanted to silence me." Elias felt a sharp pull of anger inside his chest. Not toward her, toward the kind of men he had seen too many times in the frontier, men who preyed on the weak and hid behind the emptiness of the plains. He nodded slowly, absorbing the reality of the danger. "They follow trails?" he asked. "They follow everything," she answered. "They think I will lead them to the survivors of my camp or to horses. They think killing me will keep them safe." Elias leaned back slightly, weighing the situation. The storm gave them a temporary shield, but at daylight the plains would reveal every track they left. If her pursuers were close, they had to move early or risk being trapped. Ahina watched him in silence, reading the concern in his expression. "You want me to leave in the morning?" she said. "That depends," Elias replied. "You can't travel alone in that condition, and I won't send anyone out to die." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "But if I stay, you believe the law binds us. That law matters to you," he said. "I hear that. But I won't force anything because of a moment you didn't choose." She breathed in a long, steadying breath that made her wound ache. Tribal law says a man who sees a woman like this must claim her, to protect her honor, to give her safety. If he refuses, she is shamed. And what do you want? Elias asked. Ahina paused. No fear this time, just exhaustion. I want to live, she said. I want to bury my family if they are dead. I want to return to my people. Everything else can wait. Her honesty carried the weight of reality rather than drama. Elias nodded. Then that's what we focus on. Getting you home. The wind thrashed against the door again. Ahina flinched, and Elias noticed the reaction. You think they might be near, he said. They were close yesterday, she admitted. I barely reached this shack before nightfall. They will search every shelter in the area. They know I need cover from the storm. Elias considered the problem. If they find the shack, they'll assume I'm protecting her. They'll fight. They won't negotiate. He had been in similar situations before, too many times. He understood ambush, desperation, and the thin line between survival and regret. He glanced at her again. She was watching him with a steady focus, as if trying to understand what kind of man he was and why he had not taken advantage of her vulnerability. You said something earlier, Elias said quietly, about the law binding us. If I walked out that door now, would your people blame you? Ahina hesitated, then answered, they would blame the man who saw me. They would say he left me dishonored. So you fear shame from your people and death from the men hunting you. Elias rubbed his jaw, thinking through the options. I won't leave you with either of those. A strange expression crossed her face. Not relief exactly, but something steadier, as if she had expected to hear neither protection nor understanding from a stranger. He shifted closer to the fire and gestured toward the blanket covering her. Get warm. You'll need your strength tomorrow. She adjusted the blanket slightly, careful not to reveal more of her injury. Then she spoke with a quieter tone. You did not answer the law. I heard it, Elias said. But I'll answer it when you're safe, not when you're bleeding and hunted. This time, she didn't argue. Something in his voice, firm yet respectful, settled her enough to remain silent. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm began to ease, though the wind still pushed waves of sand against the side of the shack. As minutes stretched into an hour, Elias noticed her eyelids lowering. Her body fought sleep, as if she feared what might happen once she let her guard down. You can rest, he said. I don't trust you yet, she replied. That's fair, Elias answered. But nothing will happen while you sleep. I'll keep the fire going. She studied him for a long moment, measuring whether his promise meant anything. Finally, she let her head rest against the wall. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders dropped. The exhaustion she had fought for hours finally overtook her. Elias watched her with a cautious awareness. He had no interest in proving himself a hero, but he wasn't going to let an injured woman die because fate had dropped her in his path. He adjusted his coat, sat with his back to the door, and listened to the storm fade. Tomorrow, the real danger would come. Tonight, he would guard the shack. Ahina slept for the first time in days, still wary, still wounded, but no longer alone. Elias stayed awake long after Ahina's breathing settled into a steady rhythm. The storm outside weakened, but the wind still carried enough force to mask distant sounds. He listened carefully for anything unnatural, hoofbeats, voices, or the sharp click of a rifle being cocked. Nothing came through the noise, but he knew that did not mean the area was safe. Men hunting someone moved differently at night. They expected their prey to be weakened, desperate, or asleep. He tightened the blanket around his shoulders and checked the fire. A faint glow lit the walls of the shack, just bright enough to warm the air, but not enough to attract unwanted attention from outside. Ahina rested on the far side of the room, her posture still tense even in sleep. Every few minutes she shifted, reacting to either pain or dreams she couldn't quiet. Elias found himself watching her face, not out of curiosity, but out of caution. A wounded person sometimes worsened without warning, and he needed to know if she slipped into fever or shock. But her body temperature held stable, and the bandage remained dry. She would make it through the night if she conserved her strength. Hours passed before she stirred. A soft sound escaped her, not loud enough to be called a cry, but sharp enough to show she was waking from something unpleasant. Her eyes snapped open. She looked around as if unsure where she was, then remembered. Her breathing grew tight. "You're safe," Elias said quietly. Still in the shack, the storm's fading. Ahina pushed herself upright with slow, stiff movements. The pain grabbed her immediately, and she pressed her hand against her side. She didn't want him to see the weakness, but hiding it now wasn't possible. "You slept a few hours," Elias added. "You needed it." She didn't respond. Her attention fixed on the darkness outside the small window. "They know these plains better than you think," she said. "When the storm ends, they will search again." Elias nodded. She was right. That silence after the storm, the plains stretching out like a clean slate, made tracking easy. Tracks from before might be erased, but any new ones would stand out clearly. They needed to move before sunrise. "We'll leave early," Elias said, "before the ground hardens. If we move while there's still moisture in the dirt, our tracks won't hold well." Ahina turned her eyes toward him. She looked surprised that he had considered the details so carefully. "You know how to hide trails?" she asked. "I've worked enough cattle drives alone to avoid unwanted visitors," he said. "Tracks bring trouble if you aren't careful." It was a simple explanation, but it revealed something she had wondered from the start: how someone like him survived on the frontier without relying on a town or ranch. His knowledge wasn't the kind most cowboys bothered learning. It was the kind of knowledge a man picked up after isolating himself from others. Ahina pulled the blanket closer. "Why were you out here alone?" He hesitated, not liking questions about his past, but she deserved an answer. He also knew her people had probably taught her to distrust any man who kept too many secrets. "I used to work for a ranch east of here," Elias said. "There was a fight, one I didn't handle well. A man got hurt because of me. I didn't stay to defend myself. I left. Been moving alone since then." Ahina studied him with calm, analytical eyes. "You fear shame like my people do." He didn't deny it. She wasn't wrong. Shame was the reason she didn't want to return unprotected. Shame was the reason he didn't return to the ranch. Two different worlds, same wound. Elias changed the subject. "When you said the law binds us, is it something you believe in, or something you only say because you were forced to?" Ahina lowered her gaze. She seemed conflicted, not about the truth, but about sharing it. "When a woman is seen wounded or unclothed by a man," she said, "the tribe assumes he has claims over her. Unless he rejects her, then she carries the shame, not him." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I said it because it is the rule, and because I thought you might use it against me." Elias felt a weight settle in his stomach. She expected the worst. She's learned to expect the worst from men. "Would your people force the marriage?" he asked. "They would ask me," she replied. "But my answer would not matter. Not truly. The rule protects the tribe from dishonor." "So you feared losing the little control you had left," Elias said. She nodded. Her honesty was quiet, but steady. This was not a moment for pride. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then hear me clearly. Nothing binds us unless you want it. Nothing happens because of rules you never agreed to." Ahina looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes softened, not with affection, but with understanding. She had wondered since he walked in whether he would be like the men who hunted her. Tonight, she finally saw the difference. The fire cracked. She shifted again, bracing her ribs. "Why do you speak with such care?" she asked. Elias hesitated. Few people asked him questions this direct. "Because I know what happens when a man loses control of his choices," he said. "I've lived long enough with the consequences." Her gaze lingered on him, absorbing the weight behind his statement. A few minutes passed before she asked another question, one the listener, too, might have wondered about since the beginning. "Why didn't you leave when I ordered you to go?" she asked. Elias looked at her plainly. "Because you were bleeding, the storm was rising, and leaving you would have been a death sentence. I don't run from responsibility anymore." Ahina took a slow breath. She had expected many answers, but not that one. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to impress her. It was simply practical and honest. The wind faded completely now. The air settled into a cold, brittle quiet. Elias stood, adding the last of the dry wood to the fire. "We leave before sunrise," he said. "I'll get you safely to your people. After that, you decide what happens with your law." Ahina lay back down, this time without fear. Her body still hurt, but the dread she carried all day finally loosened its grip. "You keep your word," she said softly. "I try to," Elias replied. She shifted the blanket higher on her shoulders and closed her eyes again. Sleep came slowly, but not from exhaustion alone. For the first time since the attack on her family, she felt safe enough to rest. Elias watched the doorway, kept his rifle nearby, and waited for dawn. The night passed without threats. But the morning would bring the real test: tracks on wet earth, distant riders, and the question of whether two wounded strangers could trust each other enough to survive the day. The first gray light of dawn slipped through the cracks between the boards, casting narrow lines across the dusty floor. Elias rose before the sun cleared the ridge. He checked the fire, cold now, and stepped quietly toward the door, listening for anything beyond the stillness of early morning. The storm had passed completely, leaving the plains washed clean and silent. That silence felt heavier than the night. Ahina opened her eyes as he reached for his coat. She winced at the stiffness returning to her ribs, but pushed herself upright with determination. "You hear something?" she asked. "Not yet," Elias replied. "But they'll be riding again." Storm gave them enough cover to rest too. He pushed the door open a few inches. The sharp morning air hit his face. The ground outside was damp, not muddy, but damp enough that anyone walking across it would leave shallow, readable impressions. He scanned the horizon. No riders in sight, no dust trails, no movement. But that meant little. Men who hunted for advantage rarely rode openly at sunrise. Ahina reached for the blanket, folded it, and tied it around her shoulders. She tried to stand, inhaling through clenched teeth as pain gripped her side. Elias moved closer in case she collapsed. "I can walk," she said, anticipating his concern. "I know you can," he answered, "but don't push it more than you have to. We move slow and steady. It's easier to hide two careful tracks than one limping trail." Ahina hesitated, then allowed him to help her toward the door. She leaned on him only as much as necessary, nothing more. Her pride remained firm, but not reckless. She understood her limits now. The sun crept over the hills, spreading cold light across the plains. When Elias stepped outside fully, he crouched and examined the soil. His expression tightened. Ahina noticed. "What do you see?" she asked. He pointed to a shallow depression near a rock, just beyond the range of the overhang. "Tracks. Not old." Ahina knelt beside him, her body tensed but her voice controlled. "How many?" "3 horses. They passed in the night, maybe an hour before the storm died." Elias traced the disturbed soil with 2 fingers. They didn't stop, but they were close. Too close. Ahina's pulse quickened. She looked out across the open ground where the tracks stretched northward. "They'll circle back. They always search shelters." "They will," Elias agreed. "And when they do, we won't be here." He walked quickly to his horse, checked the saddle, and secured his bag. Ahina stood a few feet away, gripping the blanket to steady herself. "You're sure you can ride?" he asked. "I have to," she said. He helped her mount carefully, supporting her torso just enough to keep her from collapsing. She didn't protest this time. Survival outweighed pride. They rode out slow, keeping close to the ridge where the ground was rockier and less likely to hold prints. Elias guided the horse with practiced hands, choosing paths that broke up tracks, weaving between bushes and scattered boulders. Ahina watched his deliberate choices and realized he wasn't simply avoiding danger. He was preparing for a long chase. After several minutes of silence, she spoke. "The men, you said you understood the type." "Why?" Elias didn't turn his head, but his jaw tightened. "Because I've dealt with them before. Men who think the plains belong to them. Men who hide behind distance and lawlessness." Ahina studied him. His tone held no boast, only experience. "You were a ranch hand," she said. "But your skills, they're different from cowboys." "I learned from trail work," Elias replied. "And from mistakes." Keeping myself alive became the only way to make up for the ones I couldn't save. She absorbed that answer quietly. She didn't press for details, but she understood a small piece of the burden he carried. The horse moved through a narrow cut in the ridge. Elias stopped suddenly and raised a hand for silence. Ahina held her breath. Voices, faint, but distinct enough to confirm what they feared. Two men speaking, too far to understand the words, but close enough to track the tone. Alert, impatient, and searching. Ahina leaned forward, whispering, "They found the shack." Elias listened again, then nodded. "They're checking it. They'll see the fire pit and know you weren't alone." Her stomach twisted. "That puts you in danger. You didn't have to get involved. That choice passed yesterday," he said. "We're in this until you're safe." He guided the horse behind a cluster of boulders. From there, they could observe the plains without being easily seen. Elias scanned the horizon, locating 3 riders in the distance. They moved slowly, scanning the ground, working outward from the shack in a widening circle. "They'll follow any track they find," Ahina whispered. "They'll find fewer if we move toward the canyon," Elias said. "Narrow paths hide our trail. Hard ground covers what little we leave behind." She watched the riders, her breath steady but her hands tight around the blanket. "If they catch us," she said carefully, "you must leave me. They only want—" "No," Elias cut in. "You don't understand. They want to hide their crime. You have no part in this." "I do now," he replied, "and I won't leave you for them." She didn't argue further. There was no hesitation in his voice, and the weight of his answer left her without words. Elias turned the horse west. "Once we reach the canyon, we plan our next move. No more running blind." Ahina nodded. Through her pain, fear, and exhaustion, something steadier grew. Trust, slow but real. Elias wasn't helping her out of obligation or cultural law. He was helping because he refused to let anyone face death alone again. The riders behind them fanned out across the plains, moving with purpose. Their silhouettes sharpened in the morning light. The hunt had begun again. But this time, Ahina wasn't running alone, and Elias Ward, a man who had spent years avoiding every human tie, now found himself responsible for someone whose survival depended entirely on the choices he'd make before sundown. The canyon waited ahead, dangerous, narrow, and the only chance they had. The chase would end there, one way or another. Elias kept the horse at a controlled pace as they moved toward the canyon's entrance. The land shifted gradually, flat plains rising into uneven ground, scattered brush giving way to stone ledges and narrow paths created by years of wind cutting through rock. The early morning sun climbed higher, sharpening every shadow. Behind them, the 3 riders had already begun narrowing their search pattern. They were still distant silhouettes, but their direction was clear. They were following the only logical escape route. Ahina gripped the saddle horn, her jaw tight from the pain that returned each time the horse jolted. She forced herself to stay alert. She scanned the horizon repeatedly, trying to anticipate danger before Elias had to react. He noticed her effort and spoke without looking back. "You don't need to watch every angle. How about the back trail?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I watched for days. Hard to stop now. It kept you alive," he said, "but now you're not alone. Let me take the weight for a while." The canyon rose ahead, a split in the rock, narrow enough in places that only one horse could pass at a time. Hunters would hesitate before entering such a place. Ambushes favored the person who already knew the terrain. "Did you use this canyon before?" Ahina asked. Elias studied the rock walls. "A few times, when I drove cattle through storms. The ground's uneven, but there are spots to hide and places where tracks fade. If we move carefully, they'll lose our trail." Ahina held onto the saddle, steadying her breath. "What if they follow anyway?" "Then we pick the ground," Elias replied, "and make sure we're not the ones caught in the open." She didn't ask more. His voice stayed calm and factual, not overconfident. He didn't promise safety, only strategy. They reached the canyon mouth just as the riders behind them reached the ridge they had left. Elias guided the horse into the narrow pass. Sharp stone walls rose on both sides, casting long shadows even in morning light. The air cooled. Sounds changed too. Footsteps echoed differently, wind softened, and distant noises became clearer. Ahina looked around with tension building in her muscles. Every tight passage reminded her how traps were set in places like this. Elias sensed it. "You're thinking about what could happen," he said. "I'm thinking about what has happened," she answered quietly. "When we fled my family's camp, we tried hiding between rocks. They found us anyway." Elias didn't dismiss her fear. "They found you because there was only fear guiding the choice. Today is different. Today is planned." She absorbed his words. Reason mattered now. Panic could kill them. As they advanced deeper, Elias stopped occasionally to study the ground. He intentionally steered the horse across patches of loose stone where hoof prints wouldn't hold. In other places, he guided the animal along the edge of a dry stream bed, making their trail appear broken and irregular. "You learned this skill the hard way," Ahina said. Elias kept his eyes forward. "Hard lessons are the ones you don't forget." Ahina wanted to ask what had marked him so deeply. What mistake had driven him to live alone? But she sensed now wasn't the moment. He was fully focused on their escape. After a long stretch of silence, the canyon opened slightly into a small pocket of flat ground. Elias stopped the horse. "Time to walk," he said. "The walls get too tight ahead. Safer if we lead the horse." He dismounted and helped Ahina down. She gripped his arm harder than she intended. The pain shot through her side, but she forced herself upright. "You all right?" Elias asked. "Yes," she said quickly, though the strain on her face said otherwise. Elias adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, making sure no cold air reached the wound. "Stay close to the wall. Don't slip." They walked single file, Elias leading the horse and Ahina keeping a hand along the stone. The canyon walls pressed inward, leaving barely enough room for the horse's flanks. The ground tilted in places, and loose gravel shifted under their boots. If the riders entered this passage, every sound would echo. Every mistake would be fatal. Ahina's breathing became uneven, not from panic, but from the physical strain. Elias slowed the pace. "Talk to me," he said in a steady voice. "Tell me what's hurting." "Just the cut," Ahina answered. "Pulls when I move." "Pain's good," Elias said. "It means you're holding on." She gave a faint, tired smile. "You sound like my mother." "What would she tell you now?" Elias asked. Ahina didn't hesitate. To keep walking. They pressed onward. After several minutes, they reached a wider section where sunlight reached the ground. Elias stopped, shielding his eyes as he looked back the way they came. Through a break in the canyon wall, he spotted movement on the plain. 3 riders approaching the canyon's entrance. "They found our trail," he said quietly. Ahina turned, gripping the blanket. "How long until they reach this part?" "Not long," Elias said. "But this canyon branches in 2 ahead. If we move fast, they won't know which path we took." Ahina braced herself. "Then let's not waste breath." They continued deeper until the canyon split. One path turned into a steep, winding climb. The other narrowed into a shadowed passage. Elias considered both routes, thinking like a hunter and a man who'd spent years avoiding trouble. "They'll expect us to take the climb," he said. "It leads to open ground. So we take the other one." Ahina trusted his judgment. They entered the darker passage. The walls squeezed inward again, but the path was protected, almost hidden. No tracks from animals or people marked the ground. Elias felt the temperature drop. The sound of hooves echoed faintly behind them, distant but closing. Ahina's heart quickened. "They're inside the canyon," she whispered. Elias checked his rifle and motioned for silence. "We need to gain distance. Once we reach the bend ahead, they won't see us." He moved faster, helping Ahina over uneven sections. Every step mattered now. Every breath had weight. When they rounded the bend, the canyon opened into a shallow basin surrounded by high stone walls. Elias stopped sharply. He studied the ground. Flat, firm stone. No tracks would hold here. "This is it," he said. "This is where they lose us. Even if they find the passage, the trail stops on rock." Ahina leaned on the wall, breathing hard. "And then we climb out through that cut," Elias said, pointing to a narrow break in the rock slope. "It leads to the ridge. From there, We can disappear into the hills. Ahina followed his gesture, analyzing the terrain. It was steep but doable. Behind them, the echo of hooves grew clearer. Can we make it? She asked. Elias nodded. We don't have a choice. He took her hand, not as a claim, not as a command, but as steady support, and started up the slope. The riders poured into the canyon. Their voices bounced off the walls in sharp, impatient calls. Ahina tightened her grip on Elias's hand. She no longer questioned why he helped her. She questioned how she had survived before him. They climbed higher, inch by inch, while the men below dismounted to study the dead-end trail of stone. For the first time since her family was attacked, Ahina felt the possibility of survival not as a hope, but as something real and near. Together, they reached the ridge. They disappeared over the top, just as the hunters lost the last sign of their trail. The ridge leveled beneath their feet, offering a narrow but solid stretch of ground before the slope dipped into a field of sparse pines and uneven rock. Elias helped Ahina sit against a boulder while he checked the area below. The canyon hunters were now small figures trapped in the basin, arguing among themselves as they searched for tracks that no longer existed. Their voices carried faintly upward, but their frustration was clear. They won't find the exit, Elias said. We bought ourselves time. A few hours, maybe more. Ahina exhaled slowly, easing her back against the stone. Sweat gathered at her temples from the climb, and the movement had reopened a dull ache in her ribs. Time is enough, she said. We can reach the foothills before they scatter again. Elias nodded, but before they moved on, he knelt beside her to check the bandage. The cloth held, though a small stain marked the edge, evidence of strain, not danger. He tightened it carefully. You pushed harder than your wound liked, he said. You need to rest before we go farther. Ahina didn't argue. Her breath was shallow, her energy thin. She watched him with steady eyes, noticing something different in his expression. Concern, but also distance, as if he were wrestling with something he hadn't shared yet. You hide your own pain better than I do, she said quietly. Elias paused, the bandage still under his fingers. What makes you say that? You speak like a man who's been running longer than I have, she replied. And you move like you expect something to break beneath you. He sat back on his heels. For a moment, he didn't speak. She had touched something he usually kept buried beneath silence and routine. You asked why I travel alone, Elias finally said. Why stay away from towns, away from people? I never gave you the truth. Ahina waited, her breathing steady despite the pain. She sensed this was not a moment she needed to fill with questions. She simply gave him space to speak, something few people had ever done for him. There was a ranch, Elias said. A good one. I worked there 3 years. I handled cattle, repaired fences, did whatever needed doing. The owner trusted me. His family trusted me. He swallowed once, not for emotion, but for clarity. One night, a group of men tried taking horses. I confronted them. A scuffle broke out. One of the ranch hands, young, barely 19, stepped between us at the wrong moment. My gun went off. Ahina's eyebrows tightened slightly. She didn't look shocked, only focused. He lived, Elias continued, but the bullet crushed part of his hip. He'll walk with pain his whole life because I panicked and fired too fast. You try to stop thieves, Ahina said. You didn't plan to hurt him. That doesn't change what happened, Elias replied. The rancher forgave me. His son did too. But I couldn't stay there after that. I looked at the boy every day, knowing I'd taken something from him he'd never get back. Ahina observed him in silence. She saw not a man bragging about past violence, but a man who had carried the same mistake for years without knowing how to set it down. You left to punish yourself, she said. I left because I didn't trust myself anymore, Elias corrected. Thought maybe distance would keep people safe from me. Ahina shook her head gently. But you saved me. You didn't panic. You didn't fire wildly. You made careful choices. He looked away, scanning the horizon, even though danger was distant. That's because I learn what happens when I don't. For a moment, neither spoke. The morning wind cooled the sweat on their faces. The ridge gave them a vantage point over the plains. Empty, quiet, but deceptive in its calm. Ahina shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around her. My past isn't clean either, she said. You asked what happened to my family. I didn't tell everything. You don't have to, Elias said gently. I do, she replied. If we survive together, truth matters. He met her eyes again. My family camped near the river, Ahina explained. The same men who hunt me came 3 days before the attack. They traded with us food, knives, nothing unusual. We believed them friendly. My mother warned me not to trust men who smile too easily. I didn't listen. Elias understood instantly. They studied your camp. Yes, she said. And when they returned at night, they knew where we slept. They knew where we kept our horses. They killed quickly. No warning. We ran because that was the only chance. Her voice didn't tremble, but her jaw tightened as she fought the memory. I trusted them, she said. My mother trusted me because I insisted. That mistake cost her life. Elias shook his head. Their actions cost her life, not your trust. Ahina didn't argue, but the guilt in her eyes was heavy. Different stories, same wound, the past holding on even when survival demanded letting go. Elias rose and offered her his hand again. We move when you're ready. But know this, your life doesn't end because of what they did or what you believed. You didn't choose their cruelty. Ahina accepted his hand, not because she needed help standing, but because the gesture carried weight now. It wasn't obligation. It wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. Two people carrying scars that didn't need to remain hidden. As they continued along the ridge, Elias kept a steady pace, watching for safe paths leading toward the foothills. Ahina stayed close behind, her steps fueled not by strength but by determination. They descended into thicker brush, where the hunters would lose all visibility from a canyon. The land ahead stretched into winding slopes and scattered pine, offering cover but also the risk of ambush if they weren't careful. Ahina broke the silence as they walked. You said the law binds us only if I choose it. But if we survive this, what will you choose? Elias didn't look back. He took a few steps before answering. I'll choose what feels right when you're no longer running for your life, he said. Not before. Not under fear. Ahina accepted that answer. It wasn't avoidance. It was respect. They reached the first cluster of pines, where a hidden trail wound down into safer ground. Elias stopped again, checking the soil, listening for followers. We're ahead of them, he said. If we keep moving, they won't find us before nightfall. Ahina tightened her blanket and stepped beside him. Then let's finish what the past tried to break. Elias gave a faint nod. Together, they moved deeper into the shelter of the foothills. For the first time since the line shack, the danger felt manageable. Not gone, not forgotten, but something they could face together instead of alone. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew the truth. Whatever bound them now was stronger than any law. It was survival shared, grief understood, and trust earned in the hardest moments. Elias and Ahina moved through the foothills with careful, measured steps. The terrain shifted into thicker pines and uneven ridges that made travel slower but safer. Each turn of the narrow trail placed them deeper into Apache territory, still miles from her people, but farther from the open plains where hunters thrived. The sky had turned pale blue overhead, the sun climbing higher while the air grew warmer. The peacefulness of the woods contrasted sharply with the reality chasing them from behind. Ahina's breathing remained steady, though every step reminded her of the wound beneath the blanket. Elias checked her often, not out of doubt, but because he knew the limits of human endurance. She hid her pain well, yet the subtle flinch in her eyes did not escape him. We'll stop soon, he said without turning. Not long, just enough for you to drink and breathe. Ahina adjusted her grip on the blanket. We stop when you need it too, she replied. You haven't rested since the shack. I'm used to going long, he said. And I'm used to pushing through worse, she countered. He glanced back, noticing the stubborn determination on her face. It reminded him of someone he used to be before guilt shaped his habits into caution. She wasn't reckless. She simply understood the cost of giving up. Eventually, Elias slowed them near a fallen pine trunk, sheltered by two high rocks that shielded them from visibility. He helped her sit, then handed her the small canteen he carried. She drank slowly, careful with each swallow so her chest wouldn't tighten again. While she drank, Elias listened. Birds rustled overhead. Wind whispered through needles and branches. But no hoofbeats, no voices, no gun clicks. The hunters weren't near the foothills yet. Not close enough for concern, but close enough to keep moving. Ahina looked up at him. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "Not until they're sure I'm dead. They'll stop when they no longer know where to look," Elias answered. "Once we cross the timberline, they'll lose their advantage. They don't know these hills like your people do." Ahina's expression tightened. "If we reach my people, what then? They will question you. They will question me. And they will ask the law again." "I know," Elias said. She watched him carefully. "What will you tell them?" Elias lowered himself onto a rock across from her. He took a moment before answering, gathering his thoughts. Not because he didn't know the truth, but because he needed to say it clearly. "I'm not running from responsibility anymore," he said. "Not from what happened in the past. And not from what I walked into when I entered that shack." Ahina studied his face, searching for something, hesitation, doubt, anything that suggested he was only speaking out of pressure or fear. But his voice held the same grounded steadiness she had come to trust. "You said the law binds us only if I choose it," she said. "That's still true," Elias told her. "But I'm not turning away from you. Not after everything we've lived through since last night." Ahina let out a slow breath. She shifted slightly, testing her ribs, then rested her hands on her knees. "My people believe choice is earned when danger strips away all lies," she said softly. "They say when a person shows who they are in life and death moments, their truth becomes clear." Elias felt something shift in her tone, an honesty that carried weight. "And what truth do you see in me?" he asked. Ahina didn't answer immediately. Her eyes dropped to the dirt beneath her feet, then lifted again, steady. "You didn't take advantage when I was helpless," she said. "You didn't run when I said the law binds us. You didn't leave when danger grew. My people will judge you according to your actions, not your blood or your past. And so will I." He accepted her words, but he needed to confront the reality neither had spoken aloud yet. "If danger catches up before we reach your tribe," Elias said, "I'll hold them off. You get to safety first. That's not up for debate." Ahina's expression sharpened instantly. "I will not leave you behind. You may not have a choice." "I always have a choice," she said firmly. "And I choose not to abandon the man who saved my life." Elias felt the air shift between them. This wasn't obligation. It wasn't fear. It wasn't tribal law dictating her stance. It was loyalty, earned and freely given. "And if you die because you stayed with me?" he asked. "Then I die with honor," she answered. Not as prey. He didn't push further. Her decision was clear. It wasn't born from panic or desperation. It came from the calm certainty of someone who had weighed every risk and accepted the path that aligned with her values. A sudden crack of a branch echoed from the ridge above. Elias rose instantly, hand going to his rifle. Ahina stiffened, holding the blanket aside to reach her knife. They waited, eyes scanning the tree-line. Silence, then movement, but it wasn't riders. A mule deer appeared between two trees, lifted its head, then trotted off. Elias lowered the rifle slowly. "They'll be on the ridgeline within the hour," he said. "We should go." Ahina adjusted her footing and stood with effort. This time she accepted his arm without hesitation. The ground ahead sloped downward, leading toward a series of narrow passes her people often used to travel undetected. Elias let her guide him now. This land, unlike the plains, belonged to her knowledge. As they descended, she spoke again, her voice steady but low. "When we reach my people, they will ask if you stand with me freely. They will expect an answer. And whatever you choose, it will shape what comes next." Elias nodded. "I'll speak for myself, but I won't let your people think you're alone." She met his gaze. "I know." They continued down the slope, the woods growing thicker, the air cooler. Behind them, somewhere far across the plains, the hunters regrouped and pressed onward. Ahead of them, the path toward her tribe, and everything it demanded, waited. And for the first time since they met, neither walked for survival alone. They walked with a shared purpose, knowing the next confrontation would test not just their endurance, but the bond forming between them. By midday, Elias and Ahina reached a winding stretch of narrow woodland passes that our people used during hunts and seasonal travel. The terrain rose and fell in sharp angles, creating natural choke points and blind corners. For most travelers, the area was dangerous and unpredictable. For anyone familiar with it, however, it offered the strongest defensive ground between the plains and the Apache territory ahead. Ahina walked slowly but with purpose. Every few minutes, she reached out to touch the bark of a pine or the edge of Stone Ridge, orienting herself. Elias realized she was not simply moving forward. She was navigating from memory, finding the safest route the same way a seasoned tracker read the earth. "You know this land well," he said, watching her scan the trees. "I grew up running through these hills," she answered. "My people taught me every trail, every hiding place. You think your tribe is close. Close enough to reach before nightfall," she said, "but not close enough to keep us safe here." Elias nodded. He could feel the shift in the air, the tightening sense that danger was closing in. The hunters had lost their trail in the canyon, but they were not men who gave up easily. If they were riding hard on open plains, they could reach the foothills before sundown. As they rounded a bend, Ahina stopped abruptly and raised a hand. Elias froze. Hoofbeats. Faint, but unmistakable. Ahina looked toward the slope above them. They found the right ridge. Elias set his jaw, scanning the terrain. "They'll try to cut us off instead of chasing from behind. We cannot outrun horses uphill," she said. "No," Elias agreed. "We choose the ground." He guided her toward a small natural pocket in the slope, a rocky indentation framed by two angled walls. It offered cover from above and a clear line of sight through the pass ahead. Whoever entered would be forced into a narrow path. Ahina's breath tightened. She understood what he intended. "You want to ambush them. I want them to stop chasing you," Elias said calmly. "This is the safest ground to make that happen. And if we fail, then we make them pay for every inch," Elias replied. Ahina steadied herself. She placed her hand briefly on his arm, not to stop him, but to acknowledge the risk. "I fight with you," she said. Elias knew she was injured, that her strength was limited, but he also knew she would not hide behind him. "You stay low," he instructed. "Guide me. Tell me what they'll do, where they'll move. You know their kind better than I do." She nodded. "I can do that." They positioned themselves in the shadows of the stone pocket. Elias rested his rifle across his knee and listened to the hoofbeats growing louder. 3 riders. He counted their rhythm, gauged their distance. The men slowed as they entered the pass, careful now, suspicious of the narrowing path. Ahina whispered, "They will spread out. One will take the right slope, one the center, one the left." Elias raised a rifle. "Which one will try to climb?" "The one with the red band on his arm," she answered without hesitation. "He did the same in my camp." Moments later, the man with the red band reined his horse to the right and began dismounting for a climb. Ahina's breathing hitched, not from fear, but recognition. "They killed my brother," she whispered. Elias steadied the barrel. "Tell me when." The man climbed 2 steps upward, searching for a higher vantage point. Ahina's voice was quiet but firm. "Now." Elias fired once. The shot cracked through the pass, echoing between the stone walls. The man collapsed instantly, tumbling down the slope with a harsh thud. The other 2 riders jerked in surprise, shouting as their horses reared. "Stay low," Elias said, positioning himself behind the rock as a retaliatory shot ricocheted off the stone above them. Ahina ducked, dragging herself farther under cover. "The tall one reloads slowly," she said. "Aim for him first." Elias shifted, waited for the brief pause when the rider tried to steady his horse, and fired again. The man toppled sideways, hitting the ground hard. Only one rider remained. He spurred his horse forward, rage replacing strategy. He fired wildly, bullets kicking up dirt and chips of stone near their refuge. Ahina clenched her jaw. He panics when cornered. He rushed us before. He will close the distance. Then he gives me the shot, Elias said. The rider charged through the pass, but his wild movement exposed him. Elias stood, centered the rifle, and fired a precise single round. The horse skidded to a halt as the man dropped from the saddle. The echo died slowly. Silence returned to the foothills, still, heavy, and final. Ahina watched the dust settle in the pass. Her shoulders trembled once, not from fear, but from release, the kind that comes when a long stretch of terror finally breaks. Elias turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, but didn't speak immediately. She wiped a tear from her cheek, but it wasn't grief. It was relief mingled with the weight of everything she survived to reach this moment. "They're gone," she said quietly. "All of them." Elias lowered his rifle. "They won't follow you again." Ahina exhaled, a long, controlled breath that carried days of fear out of her chest. She met his eyes with a steadiness that held no uncertainty. "You saved my life twice," she said. "And this time, you let me guide you." "You knew their ways," Elias replied. "I trusted you." Ahina leaned against the stone wall, not from exhaustion alone, but from the emotional release that followed danger finally ending. "My people will know what you did. They will honor it." Elias didn't answer. He simply offered his hand to help her stand. She accepted without hesitation. "We head to your tribe now?" he asked. Ahina nodded. "Yes. They need to know what happened. And you must speak for yourself before them." Elias adjusted the rifle over his shoulder. "Then let's finish this." Together, they walked out of the pass, not as hunter and hunted, not as strangers bound by misunderstood law, but as two survivors who had earned their bond through choices made under fire. The path to her people lay ahead, and for the first time, the end of their journey felt real. The air shifted as Elias and Ahina descended from the rugged pass into a gentler stretch of wooded ground. The weight of pursuit had lifted from their backs, replaced by a quieter tension, one shaped by what lay ahead rather than behind. Ahina's steps grew steadier, guided by memory rather than fear. She paused at certain trees, recognizing carvings left by young hunters, faint tracks from recent gatherings, and the subtle signs of tribal patrols that would remain invisible to outsiders. Elias followed her lead, aware that he was entering a world where every rule, custom, and expectation would be different from his own. He kept a respectful distance, letting her guide the final approach. "You're close to home," he said. Ahina nodded. "Another hour, maybe less. My people move their camps often, but I can feel them here. The land carries their scent." Her voice held a blend of relief and unease. Going home meant safety, but it also meant facing questions she had been avoiding since the moment she staggered into the lion shack. Her wound, her survival, the men who hunted her, these would all demand answers. And the old rule she had spoken about in fear, the law that bound men and women by honor, would be raised again. "You don't have to worry," Elias said, sensing her tension. "I'll speak for myself. They'll hear the truth." Ahina slowed, studying him. "They will ask if you claim me, if your heart stand with mine. They will ask it not as a threat, but as a test of truth." Elias paused. "And you? What will you say?" Ahina's expression softened, not with romantic certainty, but with quiet clarity earned through survival. "I will say what is real, that you did not take advantage of my fear, that you protected me without demand, that the law does not bind me against my will." She took a breath, steady and sure. "But I will also say that I do not walk away from someone who walked into danger for me." Her words settled between them like a promise carefully crafted by circumstance, not fantasy. They continued forward until a faint whistle echoed through the trees. Ahina stopped immediately. Elias reached instinctively for his rifle, but she raised a hand. "That's ours," she said quietly. "A scout." Within seconds, a young Apache man stepped out from behind a cedar, bow drawn but not loosed. When he saw Ahina's face, his expression shifted from suspicion to shock. "Ahina," he said in their language, voice breaking slightly. "We feared you were gone." She stepped forward with controlled effort. "I survived," she answered in Apache. "Where is the camp?" "North Trail," he said. His gaze moved to Elias next. His jaw tightened. Who is this man? Elias stood still, allowing Ahina to answer. He is the one who saved my life, she said. More than once. The scout lowered his bow, but not his caution. The elders will want to hear everything. Ahina nodded. Then take us. They walked together through thickening woods until smoke from cooking fires drifted overhead. The sound of quiet conversation, children's laughter, and horses shifting in their makeshift corral filled the air. The camp spread across a sheltered valley, a circle of lean-tos, tents, and drying racks arranged with the precision of people who understood the land deeply. All motion stopped when Ahina stepped into view. Her mother's sister rushed forward first, clasping Ahina's hands and examining her wound with trembling concern. Others followed, touching her shoulder, checking her breathing, whispering prayers of relief. Then their attention shifted to Elias. Children stared openly. Warriors observed with guard eyes. Older women murmured among themselves. Elias kept his hands visible and his posture steady. He knew he was out of place, a stranger carrying a rifle and a past unknown to them. But he also knew he had nothing to hide. Ahina's aunt spoke first. You brought a white man to our camp. Ahina straightened despite the pain. I brought the man who risked his life to protect mine. The men who killed our family pursued me. He fought them beside me. Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. The tribal chief, a tall, older man with gray streaks in his braids, stepped forward. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. Ahina, he said, you left us with nothing but fear in our hearts. We are grateful you returned, but we must understand the truth of your journey. I will tell all of it, she replied. With him beside me, the chief turned to Elias. And you, cowboy, why did you help her? Many men would have turned away. Elias met the chief's gaze. She was alone, hurt, hunted. Leaving her would have been a death sentence. That explains your actions, the chief said, but not your intention. Ahina stepped forward slightly. He saved me without asking anything in return. Not honor, not obedience, not law. When I declared the rule of binding, he refused to use it against me. This statement caused a quiet stir. The chief looked between them. Then you understand the seriousness of what you spoke? He asked Ahina. The law you invoked. Ahina inhaled carefully. I spoke it out of fear, but I stand by it now out of truth. The chief shifted his gaze to Elias. Do you claim her? Not by force, not by obligation, but by your own will? Every eye in the camp fixed on him. Elias felt the weight of the moment, not as pressure, but as a test of honesty. I won't bind her to me because of rules or wounds, he said, but I won't walk away from her either. If she chooses the bond, I stand with her freely. A quiet stillness spread through the camp. Ahina's shoulders eased. The tension she carried since the shack faded into something deeper, certainty. The chief nodded once. Then the law is satisfied. Consent from both hearts. The tribe accepts this union as true. Elias released a slow breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Ahina looked at him, not with surprise, but with understanding. He had chosen this path because he meant it, not because circumstances forced him. Her aunt approached, touching her cheek gently. You are home now, she said. The pain will heal. And this man, he carries no dishonor. As the camp resumed motion, preparing bedding, tending her wound properly, offering food, Elias remained where he stood. He wasn't an outsider anymore, but he wasn't fully part of this world either. He waited for Ahina to approach. She stepped toward him slowly, her wound bandaged with fresh materials, her posture steady. You spoke truth today, she said. So did you. She looked around the camp, then back at him. Tomorrow begins a new path. Together. Elias nodded. I'm ready. And in that quiet space between survival and belonging, their connection shifted from necessity to something chosen, deliberate, mutual, and real. When the night finally settled over the Apache camp, the air grew cool and still. Fires crackled softly across the valley, casting warm light on families gathered for evening meals. Elias sat on the edge of a small clearing, giving Ahina space as her people treated her wound and confirmed it would heal fully with rest. He listened as children laughed nearby and elders spoke quietly, the sounds blending into a peaceful rhythm he had not heard in years. Ahina approached after the healers finished tending her side. She moved slowly but with far more strength than before. Her steps carried certainty rather than fear. She stopped beside him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "They say I will recover," she said, "and they say you stood with honor today." Elias nodded, relieved to hear it. "I'm glad they accepted us." "They saw your truth," she replied. That was enough. She sat beside him, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. The camp felt different now, no longer a place of tension, but a safe ground for both of them. Warriors no longer watched Elias with suspicion. Women passed by with respectful nods. Children pointed with curiosity rather than fear. His presence, once uncertain, had settled into quiet acceptance. Ahina looked toward the stars above the valley. "My mother used to say peace is earned through hardship." Today proved her right. Elias followed her gaze. The sky stretched wide and clear, free of storm clouds or danger. "You fought for your life," he said. "You held on to something stronger than fear." She turned to him. "I didn't do it alone." Elias felt her words land with genuine weight. Neither of them needed to describe every moment that led here. The understanding rested between them naturally. A few elders approached, carrying a simple woven cloth and small wooden tokens. Their faces were calm, expectant. Ahina stood, steadying herself before facing them. The chief spoke in a clear, measured tone. "Ahina, daughter of our people, you returned with life and honor. The man who stands with you did so by choice. His courage has protected not only you, but the dignity of our tribe. We recognize your bond is true." One elder placed the woven cloth in Ahina's hands. Another handed Elias a small carved symbol shaped like a mountain ridge. It represented protection, something given only to those who had proven themselves worthy. The chief continued, "If you walk forward together, let it be with open truth." Ahina held the cloth tightly, then turned to Elias. Her voice softened. "Do you walk with me?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I do." The tribe acknowledged their decision with quiet approval, nods of acceptance, and the low murmur of shared relief. There was no grand ceremony, no elaborate ritual, only sincere recognition from the community whose trust mattered most to her. As the elders stepped away, Ahina extended the woven cloth toward Elias. "This marks our choice," she said. "Not law, not fear, choice." Elias accepted the cloth, his hands brushing hers. "Then it's a path we walk together." Later that night, the two of them moved to a quieter corner of the valley where the fires did not reach. Ahina lay on a bed of soft hides, prepared for her by the women of the tribe. Elias sat beside her, close enough to speak without raising his voice. "You're safe now," he said. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the reality settle. "Safe," she repeated, "for the first time since my family was taken." Elias lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry for what you lost." Ahina reached out, placing her hand on his. "And I'm grateful for what I found." Elias exhaled, feeling a tension release that had lived in him far longer than these past days. For years, he carried guilt, isolation, and a belief that he didn't deserve connection. But here, beside Ahina, among her people, the weight finally loosened. He wasn't running anymore. At dawn, the valley glowed with warm light. Fresh smoke rose from cooking fires, and the quiet sounds of morning spread through the camp. Ahina moved carefully, testing her strength, while Elias prepared his horse nearby. "We'll build a home near the foothills," she said, watching him. "Between your world and mine." "You're certain that's where you want to be?" Elias asked. "Yes," she replied, "because it's the place that belongs to both of us." He approached her slowly, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "Then that's where we'll go." They walked together through the edge of the valley. A few tribe members followed to see them off, offering supplies and quiet blessings. The chief raised his hand in farewell. "You are welcome here," he said to Elias. Return as family, not as visitor. Elias nodded with genuine respect. I will. Ahina took his arm gently, and the two of them stepped beyond the camp's edge, moving toward the rising sun. The foothills stretched ahead, steady ground for a new life, free of pursuit and free of old wounds that once held them apart. Their path was no longer shaped by danger or obligation. It was shaped by choice, deliberate, mutual, and hopeful. And as they walked into their new beginning, neither carried fear of the past anymore. They carried only the certainty that whatever waited beyond the horizon, they would face it together.